I get a lot of questions about earnest money. It's a different concept. Some people think it is the down payment. It can be applied towards a down payment, and it kind of is, but not really. So I wanted to go over some of the basic concepts and ideas. And is it refundable? It's a big question I get. So, what is earnest money? Well, earnest money is the initial money you, as the buyer, pay when your offer to purchase real estate is accepted by the seller. Now, once the seller accepts your offer, you have 4 calendar days to deliver to me as your realtor the earnest money check. And it's typically done in the form of a cashier's or certified check, but personal checks can be accepted. And what does it do in the contract? Is it the down payment? Not really. So earnest money is the consideration in the contract. And consideration in a contract is something of value given by both parties to a contract that induces them to enter into the agreement to exchange mutual performances. So as the buyer in a purchase contract, a real estate purchase contract, which I'll refer to as a REPC, you are bringing the earnest money. That is your consideration. And as the seller in a REPC will remove the property from the market and put it into escrow. That is their consideration. Now, where do you find it in the contract, in the real estate purchase contract? It's going to be the very first thing you go over. It'll have your offer reference date, state who you are, and who you're purchasing it from, and how much money you're going to put down as an earnest deposit, and in what form. So how much should you offer? Well, there really isn't any set amount. There's not a minimum required, and there's not a maximum set that you can go to. It varies. Although typical, it's about 1%. So on a $300,000 purchase, you'd put down $3,000. The more money you can put down, the more interested you will seem as the buyer, the more locked in. But there really isn't any set that you have to do. So who holds on to the earnest money? So there's two places it can go. It can go to either your buyer's brokerage, and the buyer's brokerage will hold it in a broker's real estate trust account, or to the title company, and a title company will hold it in their trust account. Does the earnest money deposit apply to the loan down payment? It can. If you're getting financing for the house, for the property, the earnest money will apply towards that at closing, or closing costs. It'll just apply to what you have to bring to the table. It will lessen what you have to bring to the table at closing. So if you're closing, your closing costs plus your down payment minus your earnest money is what you'll have to bring. Is it refundable? It's a big question. Everybody wants to know if and when and how they can get it back. And there's deadlines. You got to be really important and pay attention to these deadlines. The first deadline that you're going to come across when it comes to your earnest money is your due diligence deadline. And at the due diligence deadline, it is at the buyer's sole discretion. For any reason they decide to cancel before this date, their earnest money is going to be refunded. So if inspections come back and there's just too much you don't want to do or you don't like, you can cancel. There's no notice that has to be given. There has to be written notice giving canceling it, but you do not have to give a reason in the state of Utah. The second one is your appraisal and finance deadline. If the appraisal comes in lower than the asking price and you're unable to negotiate a new price, or if the terms of the loan needed are not satisfactory to the buyer and the buyer alone, then the earnest money is refundable. This one you do have to explain why you're canceling the contract to get the earnest money back. The third one is you're subject to sale of buyer's property. So there's an addendum that had to be used in this case, but if the buyer cannot close on the sale of their own property before the later of either the due diligence or the appraisal finance date, whichever one's later, the earnest money is defundable. And typically the appraisal and finance deadline is later. So if you have a house to sell and for some reason it doesn't sell, and you've used this addendum, if we have used this addendum and attached it to the contract and made it a part of the contract, then you can cancel the contract and receive your earnest money if your house cannot close by that deadline. Now, what happens if either party defaults on the contract? This is where things get interesting. So if the buyer defaults and does not perform, does not purchase the house, and they did not cancel before their deadlines, the seller has 3 different things they can do. They can cancel the REPC, and at this point their earnest money would be forfeited and released to the sellers at liquidated damages. They can also sue to enforce, and if they sue to enforce, the earnest money is kept in trust until the suit to specifically enforce is settled. And the third thing they can do is pursue other remedies. So they have any other remedies available to them by law. And in this case, the earnest money is returned to the buyer. If the seller defaults, there's 3 options that the buyer has. So if the seller decides not to perform in the contract, pulls out, does not want to sell the house after they've accepted, then the buyer has 3 options. The first is to cancel the REPC. This one gets interesting. So the earnest money is released back to the buyer, and the buyer may accept as liquidated damages an equal amount to the earnest money. So if you put $3,000 down, the seller decides, I don't want to sell. The buyer, at the time that the seller cancels the contract, can receive an extra $3,000. So you get your $3,000 back and another $3,000 back from the seller out of their funds, out of their bank accounts and whatnot, as liquidated damages. The second thing you could do is sue to enforce. And in this case, it's the same as if the buyer defaults. The earnest money is kept in trust until the suit is settled. And the third one is the same again as the buyer's default. You can pursue other remedies, anything that's available to you by law. So you can sue for more damages than the other 2 would allow you. So that's the basics of it. That's what earnest money is. It is the consideration from the buyer to complete the contract. And it is refundable under certain cases, but it also, you can lose it if you do not pay attention to your dates or if something happens. And as the seller, the bigger the earnest money a buyer puts up can also bite you in the end if you decide to cancel the contract and default on it yourself. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Love to hear from you. If there's any other topics you guys would like me to cover, we can do that on the next one.